human design is one of these modalities that it's not a hammer and a nail. It really isn't. It's multifaceted in the way that it's set up
It's
for
more like a
different
Swiss
people.
Army knife.
Exactly. It's set up for different people, different applications at different times. Okay, we're back.
All right. Yeah, I had not intended to talk about human design, but since you brought it up, I was it was really funny what you said when we stopped recording was that now it's kind of blown up and become its own religion, and people are traumatized by religion. And I thought this was a really important thing to touch on. We had ended this this conversation, but then this came up and it felt like something important to discuss. And the I want to say the dogma of human design also traumatized me. Like I became obsessed with learning everything I could about this system. And I won't put that squarely in the person's lap who trained me on it because I learned a lot from her. Like I learned a whole lot, like all of the basics, all of the foundational fundamentals, which, but there was only so far that that instruction could carry me because I knew that it was like I could I could intuitively feel that it was this two-dimensional presentation of something that went much deeper. That there was a lot more there than this coach was actually maybe even aware of herself. And anytime I brought up something that, how it intersects with this other um this other philosophy or this other teaching, how it kind of corroborates it through its analysis of energy and how it flows through the circuitry of the human body. Um, and whenever I would try to relate it to other modalities, I started getting shut down pretty quickly. And it wasn't just by her, it was by a lot of other people who use this human design, like you said, as this dogmatic religion that they really need as like an opiate or a crutch to ascribe to and refer to as a how to about how to live their lives. And that was never, I don't believe that's ever what it was meant to be for us. I think it was far bigger than that, cosmologically speaking. And um on that metaphysical level that you cannot see necessarily with your 3D eyes.
Oh my goodness. From CBT right back through all the modalities to hypnotherapy, past life regression to human design. When a consciousness harnessing modality, because let's call those things what they really are. When something is limited to a set of rigid rules, it can't evolve. Therefore, it is consciousness limiting. But consciousness in itself is ineffable, it is infinite. And so, if something is being used in a way that it cannot evolve in order to accommodate new ideas and new techniques and create different results depending on the uniqueness of a person's thumbprint, because every person is exactly as unique as their thumbprint, right?
Yes.
If it has that filter over it, it will never work for what it was meant for. And I see the same thing. As soon as you say past life regression, everybody goes Dolores Cannon, Dolores Cannon, Dolores Cannon. And they use Dolores Cannon's name in vain, like when they blaspheme and, say JC out loud,
Yeah.
right? They take what that person tried to teach us, and it has to be this one thing. right? And I see that too because the way that I give past lives is so much more different to when I started. And I too thought that it had to be this format. It's the same thing in podcasting. I know somebody that thinks that long form podcasting is better. But when I say that consumer behavior doesn't show that to be true on any level,
Hmm.
it completely gets skimmed over. Some people only have 30 minutes of information to give you. Some people are only there to talk about one topic that day. And then you move on and you can talk to them again later, and that's totally fine.
Or maybe
Creativity.
even, oh, I'm sorry. It made me think of something. Like maybe even kind of like we're doing right now, Jahan, there is a long conversation that takes place with multiple different topics explored that with the editing capacity of nowadays, as well as paired with the human attention span, it would be best received, delivered, and served in a short form way that would be it would be more beneficial to the viewers if it is delivered in that way.
I think if we're all being honest, we just want dopamine
Yeah,
and we want to be comforted when we consume content. Most people, if you look at, especially if you're a content creator, you look at the way people consume, like YouTube, for example, and you see where people skip through to get to the nuggets,
yeah.
right? Nobody cares about the in between stuff until they've heard the nuggets and they say, okay, well, how did they arrive at that conclusion? So then they go back. So you can't confuse formula with format.
Hmm.
A 3 hour long podcast, let's use that example, is a lot of time out of a person's life to ask of them in the first place. So that only serves people who are taking a plane or commuting and they have the time, but that doesn't guarantee investment because they might get 15 minutes in and say, this isn't for me. What they want is something they can complete, and completion is a result. And people will change themselves because they get dopamine out of changing themselves and seeing a positive result, a reward, right? So it's all the same consumer behavior across the board. So when somebody comes at you with the human design thing and they shut you down and they say it has to be this way, that's an instant turnoff
Hmm.
because you can't put a limit on how somebody experiences something in the first place. And human design is one of these modalities that it's not a hammer and a nail. It really isn't. It's multifaceted in the way that it's set up
It's
for
more like a
different
Swiss
people.
Army knife.
Exactly. It's set up for different people, different applications at different times.
Enjoying this episode of Between the Lines on Design Within You? Are you curious what your chart will reveal when I read between the lines of your energy signature? Then go grab your design snapshot over at designwithinyou.com in the description below.
And I think that the same is true for cognitive behavioral therapy, the same is true for hypnotherapy, and the same is true for neurolinguistic programming and all the other things. There is time and there is place and there is context. So you're not going to go to the gym for 30 minutes and finish a podcast that's 3 hours long. You'll tell yourself, I'll come back to that later, but then you get invested in something else the majority of the time, right? So you got to give people appropriate grace, really, and try to understand what it is that they're after with these things when you're a practitioner, right? Because they're coming to you because they want to know how you can help them. They want to know
Hmm.
how, how can I solve my problems with this stuff? But if you start trying to force them into an area that doesn't make sense for them or it doesn't resonate, you're the problem now.
Yeah. You have to package it in a way that they can actually absorb it. And if you're not doing that, then you're not really serving in the way that you are purporting to. And it's interesting that you're doing hypnotherapy and past life regression Because one of the facets of human design that I am most intrigued by is something that no one talks about. Like, did you know that like every single person is comprised of crystals of consciousness, one of which is the actual the notion that we are travelers and that we have lived many lives, and that this crystal is the same that before it was infused into your body, it was the same crystal in another body prior to you. And so it kind of gives this credence to the past lives. But what it also does, there's another crystal that it forms a lattice with. And this crystal is the design crystal, and it's what builds your body. And it's something that has never occurred before and will never occur again. So there is this uniqueness that, in the way in which you are presenting and expressing is different than has ever been before. But there is an element of you, an aspect of you in your conscious aspect that is, it will continue on after this body is gone. And it has been in other bodies before. Like, no one talks about that. No one talks about the crystals of consciousness. No one talks about the, it's something that we just simply take at face value, these centers, and they're loosely based off of the chakra centers or the tree of life. And it's like these constructs that are taken. But I mean, a lot of people do refer to Dolores Cannon, but it's whenever they're talking about past lives, they don't they rarely ever reference Ra Uru Hu in human design, though, and how the way that this consciousness was received on Earth was by a supernova in 1987 that permeated our atmosphere, and it actually seeded this consciousness into our awareness. And that's why it's only expanded ever since then. And that's why it was received that very same year by him during an 8-day vision. Like, no one talks about this stuff. They only want to talk about like the dogmatic, and I guess you could call it like the systematic approach to how it can help them with their business or how it can help them with their relationship. But it's really important for me to look at the origin story of why this is actually useful, why it is helpful, what is the reason why you should listen to it in the first place, because a lot of people skip over that part.
So much stuff to add to what you just said. Let me work backwards here with the last thought and go backwards. So, what happens then when your human design strategy is used very rigidly? You get a better result in your relationship, but then that stops working. Then you can't go back to that strategy, which then, by rigid rule keeping, negates the entire modality because you don't want to see there's other possibilities, right? And Dolores Cannon, no disrespect, she borrowed a lot of her information from other people because she too had to learn. And she put it into a way that could explain all this stuff. She mentions the harmonic convergence in her work as well. She mentions a similar phenomenon where consciousness is seated. But to be honest with you, going back again to another point that came for me is that when people realize that your energetic signature, when you talk about crystals of consciousness, if you were to broadcast your specific frequency at water and then freeze it, that would be a literal crystal of consciousness, and it would be yours. And people don't understand that we are just always evolving as our crystalline structure evolves, because as you mentioned in the other podcast portion, there's a scalar element to this. There's waves to this, and waves are never the same. Bruce Lee told us very simply, be like water, because water is never ever flowing the same way. It will not return the way that it came, right? And if you don't know how to ebb and flow with things, you're actually going to have a lot harder of a time understanding anything about life, let alone yourself, because you've got to let yourself just fit into the cracks any way that you can. So I think that this is something that we do, though. This is something that we do, and we don't understand that, especially in the spiritual realm, there's this great degree of emphasis on non-judgment. But all we're doing when we're not trying to judge is judge anyway.
Mm, very good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you don't observe something honestly and observe it and say, okay, well, this person was being a little bit, this way today. I wonder what that's really about, and then step back from that and then judge that too. Then what are you doing, right? We all just need to be human and stop trying to put everything in such of a tight box because it's not working anymore. We're
Hmm.
not at that point now where that's going to work. I like to reference how there's a saying, I think it's in from Theta Healing, actually. I don't know if anybody's heard of Vianna Stibel, but that's a great body of work to just read and become familiar with. There's a lot of subconscious stuff as well. It deals with the language of the subconscious, and it deals with one very important idea that consciousness creates everything that it witnesses. So if you look at the typical visualization stuff that people talk about, well, what's the purpose of a vision board? So that you can get an idea of what you're trying to create. It's not really so, it's exactly that. You visualize so you can get a rough idea, a rough draft of what it is you would like to experience, but then you let it be what it is. Because you have to then let the rubber hit the road and create, right? And when you view something through one lens, you're only going to see that. So why is it that we do this? I've asked this question many times in my meditations. I've asked it to other people. I've asked it on the podcast. Why do we do this? Why do we always get an idea and then try to make that idea fit everything and we don't let it grow? It's not bonsai, right? You don't clip it as soon as it starts to grow. You have to let it become a full tree, right? And even then, when you clip it, it grows into something you don't expect because you see how it conforms to that action. But
Mm,
we don't want to let stuff do that. And I'm just
right.
always like, why? You know? So I try to be honest with myself and I'm like, okay, dude, you're doing that again. You're doing that thing. You're doing that human thing. I don't know where it comes from. I have not found anywhere in my subconscious that it comes from. I think it's just a hardwired human thing.
Mm, yeah. Like hmm, it's really interesting. I know that it's, there was something that you said before about the flooding of information that we are having kind of inundate our consciousness and our awareness. And it's kind of like creating more confusion than it is clarity. But you alluded to something I wanted to bring back about that has to do with, because we are so inundated with so much rubbish, we are going to have to, it's kind of going to force us into this space of where we are able to properly discern the truth, because there's so much falsehood that's being thrown at us, and necessity being the mother of invention. I really do feel like this is a tenant theme to the new global cycle of the sleeping phoenix, of individuality being expressed through discernment, and not just individuality, but the realization of what is correct and what is real, and how you also mentioned that two things can be like, it can feel like they are contradictory to each other, but they can exist simultaneously, right? And it's like there is this element of discernment that is going to, I feel like we are evolving in this direction of an ability that we will have that we didn't before. See, before we had to, the cross of planning that we're coming out of, it's all about institutions kind of like bearing the the responsibility of the truth and the way that, and there's this collective power that we are given of access to, because these institutions of power exist and they do kind of that heavy lifting for us, and we were able to excel in a way that or rather ascend in a way our consciousness from the time before that was available to us. But you see now that all of those institutions are crumbling, they are changing, that many of them are they're no longer valid, they're no longer credible in the eyes of the individual. Like we can see through it and it's not serving us any longer. The discernment is going to come from a place within that is, this is going to be the characteristic of the sleeping phoenix um, new global cycle that we are entering into. I can kind of feel that is the truth, and we're going to have to figure out how to do that. And that is kind of a task of the metaphysical, intuitive, exploring and developing our extrasensory gifts in a way that we can intuit the truth without it needing to be told to us by these institutions, by these powers that should not be.
I might really mess around and blow off some headpieces right now. I might have to give everybody some wig glue to glue their hair back on, because if you really think about the logical progression of things, human beings are hardwired for community, but it's common unity when you put those two things together,
Mm,
community. And there's no way that we can escape that, because that's primarily the nature of consciousness, to be fragmented in order to come back together into this one piece. Like when you take off a piece of Play-Doh and then you rub it in, and you put the red in with the blue and the green, and it all becomes one thing, one color. But the consistency doesn't change from being Play-Doh, because you can't change that. You can't break that, right? So when you look at the dogma, there's a particular spirit of religion that has tried to control everything. And it's kind of like Alice in Chains said back in the early 90s in one of their songs: sex, lies, pain, confusion, suffering. It goes in that order all the time. And these are distractive mechanisms to stop us from coming together and doing the very thing that we're hardwired to do, which is create community. And they know that we don't need them. They even wrote about it in the most famous story of all time. At the end of Revelations, they stress the end times thing, but it's not the end of humanity as it is. When you really read that and you understand what it's saying, it's the end of them.
mm,
It's a point where we no longer need them. We no longer, and if you really look at what's happening now in humanity, you have so many people that are leaving Christianity to have a private relationship with God. They don't
mhm,
change their beliefs altogether. They still believe in Jesus, they still believe in God, but enough is enough. That's no longer working for them. And they've tasted what it's like to be close, to have a private relationship with God. And that's what they're after. The same thing's happening in the new age. People are leaving the new age and cultivating a more personal relationship. People are leaving the different forms of the witchy stuff,
mhm.
and they're saying, I don't even want to do that anymore. I just want to talk to God or whatever. There are people that are fusing everything together and cultivating a private relationship with consciousness and just trying to be better people. So all of the institutions, people are no longer happy with healthcare. They're saying, I'm just going to eat better. I'm just going to use natural remedies. And it's isolating certain companies. I'm not going to say their name because it's going to get you flagged. So there's a lot of that going on. And the thing about it is that people used to say, including myself, that there was a very small percentage of people who were awake and doing something about that awakeness. But what they don't want us to acknowledge is that it's probably like 50% of the population is now on board with becoming a better person or even more.
Mm-hmm.
And it only has to move the needle just a bit more to reach critical mass. And that's going to happen very shortly because no matter what they do, it's always just a small demographic of people that still believe that. Most people just don't even want to participate in politics, but that's what the TV's for, to position a bunch of people standing around and saying, oh, there was this protest in support of this idea, and when there was really like 10, 15 people, and they just framed it this way. Or this thing happens and they never show you any dead bodies, they just show you body bags.
Mm-hmm.
Or this thing happens and it's just a boat out on the ocean and they never zoom in on the boat. Nobody ever gets on and off the boat. It's always to keep whoever is still stuck in that paradigm, which is not their fault. That's just how they were raised. And when a person experiences something that challenges their protective mechanism, they double down on that belief because that's what the brain's hardwired to do. So it's not their fault. They're
Mm-hmm.
not stupid. They're not nasty people and all this other stuff, this rubbish that people come up with because that's more separation anxiety that you're experiencing. You haven't tried to understand that person. You've just classed them, categorized them as being an a-hole for absolutely no reason when you don't have the full story, right? But that's not what is going to make you feel good. If you're honest, you realize that you do that automatically, and then you're like, wait a minute, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have judged that person. I shouldn't have labeled that person, right? So there's so much going on that naturally, by its own design, consciousness is creating unity.
Mm-hmm.
But in a weird way, it has to create separation from the systems that were set up to keep us in disunity. So very shortly, there's going to be an end time where a very small subsection of people who just can't imagine what they would do without that system are going to stay the same, but it's going to be the majority of us are going to be talking to each other and having a laugh and having a good time. And we'll all be helping each other and living the way that we were intended to live. I even see animals doing things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. I even see animals, talking to each other and getting along. Dogs no longer want to eat each other alive in public. They go up to each other and they sniff and they're like, okay, you're cool. And they go along about their business. I'm seeing species of birds that wouldn't coexist together.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing birds having human experiences of life, and everybody knows Birdie, my bird. And, he doesn't see himself as being separate from me. And I noticed that as I have cared for him from a little baby, that all of the other birds of his species come near to me because they recognize that I've mastered that separation between man and bird. So they're all very curious, right? And these things, it's kind of like the potato thing with the monkey, the 100 monkeys theory,
Mm-hmm.
right? Consciousness is accommodating this common unity across the board. But if you don't look for the evidence of that and you let the television and these negative podcasters and stuff tell you that that's what's going on, then you're not going to see it for yourself. So you have to live your life with a speculum and you have to I want to see where things are changing. If you don't want to see it, it's like the X-Files. I want to believe. You couldn't convince Mulder that there was no aliens because
Mm-hmm.
I want to believe, right? And that's another thing that's happening as well. Across the board, you're seeing people acknowledging that there's strange things happening that ordinarily didn't happen before in the sky, acknowledging that there's some contact, acknowledging that negative entities and positive entities exist, acknowledging that they have experiences with angels every day. You have pastors coming out and saying, right here in this book that we normally use, it says right here that there's interdimensional beings that are bad. And right here it says that there's celestial beings that are good. And some of them aren't so good either. Right here it says it. You're having these same pastors sit down with the military to discuss how these themes are going to be disclosed over time so that people don't freak out. There's a lot that's happening. But if you listen to the wrong person, it's always going to be negative reports on it. It's never going to be a very balanced report. So I think that that's what people need to look for. If somebody says something to you and there's balance, you're closer to what's really happening. But we're also at that point now where a lot of people are really starting to pay attention to the way that they feel about stuff and go inside. And going inside doesn't mean meditation in a monastic sense. It just means becoming aware of something, aware that your body is having a bad response to it, and trusting that something else is going on and wanting to figure it out for yourself. So I'll cap that off there.
I love it. You've given me a lot to think about, Jehan. And I really think that you are an embodiment of that sleeping phoenix energy of like what is coming next and what we are moving away from and what is on the horizon for us to embrace rather than be afraid of. There's a lot of fear surrounding change. And I think everyone can feel like they can innately feel there is change happening all around them in every capacity that you just described. And what that conjures for many of us is fear because we are afraid of the unknown. But what your energy really summons for me is not only this acceptance and this awareness that it's changing, but also like moving towards it rather than flinching, like moving towards it with intention and utilizing that awareness as a tool to best embrace it in the most productive way that is it's going to rise all ships with the tide is how it feels to me. So I really appreciate you driving that home. That's
Yeah.
gonna really it's gonna really feature that energy in a way that does it justice.
Yeah, I think that underpinning a lot of the anxiety is that we know that everything is moving so fast and it really has become an emotional roller coaster ride for a lot of people. And what people worry about is that we had that thing that resulted in the needly thing that happened 6 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's kind of waiting for the hammer to drop again,
Yeah.
except that them, the Voldemorts of this world, who shall not be named, are stuck because nothing else after that has worked to slow down the unity and the awareness raising that's happening naturally, right? So I think that awareness and a willingness to understand and to just love people for no reason is the glue that is holding everything together because we had to take a good hard look at everything that we were doing 6 years ago. And that created more of an impact psychologically than the fear and the trauma that was on the back end of it.
Mm.
And I think that what worries a lot of people, even the ones that have awakened but haven't gotten out of bed yet, or they're still struggling to reach a point of clarity, because clarity is the opposite of confusion. And when you have a force that rules by confusion and division and uncertainty, you don't know what to do with that. And what I was saying is that that's the biggest shared thing that everybody has across the board. That they're waiting for something to happen that's going to be really big, that's going to mess everything up again in response to us getting better. Except that there is no response. Because if anybody ever came along and let's say there was a drastic scenario and they said, okay, we're just going to lock you down. We're going to take away all your money. We're going to lock you down. If they did that now, people would be more likely to riot. And one thing that David Icke says all the time that is actually very true when you look at it is that they do the totalitarian tiptoe.
Mhm.
So they test things, and that didn't work. We're going to try something else. And when you realize that you're dealing with people who do that, they just test stuff to see what works all the time. And you just keep saying no, there's nothing they can do about it except for pull a really big move. But then they can't do that without your consent either.
Mhm.
The last thing that they want to do is be visible for exactly what they are. And the last thing that they want to do is be held accountable for what they do. And so that's our way of dealing with things by not participating in that and participating in all the things that make us feel good. You keep offsetting that. And they don't know what to do with that because they don't understand what love is. They're like foreigner all the time on repeat. I want to know what love is, but you can't show them because it kills them. They don't know what
Right.
it is,
Oh
right?
man.
So it's like being stuck with a broken record a lot of the time. And that's what makes people anxious because I think a lot of people still say, okay, if they had the nuts to really do that 6 years ago, they could do it again. And
Mhm.
conspiracy theories don't help. But if you really pay attention to conspiracy theories, there's a limitation on that. It can only go so far. And unfortunately, a lot of it is true, but a lot of it is also fabricated by the said same people because they're still fishing. But you got to take your scissors and cut that little line off and let the hook get sucked into the tide and disappear, right? So you can't let them make you anxious. You have to move forward no matter what with some level of certainty that, as I ended the last part of the episode with, is you got to let everything be okay. You just got to be okay with everything that happens because I tell you what, if they're trying to kill you, for example, let's use that very loosely, anxiety is going to kill you faster.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of the times they're kind of using our own unawareness against us, like we are our own worst enemy, and it makes it to where they don't really have to lift a finger. We do it to ourselves, and that's kind of by design as well. And if we're made aware of that, then a lot of their power is diminished in the same stroke.
That's why there's power in emphasizing that all the stuff that we experience isn't our fault
Hmm.
because it's not our default nature. It's a default mechanism that protects us from getting hurt. So you have people that continually try to hurt us to exploit our natural mechanism to survive. And then when you're in survival mode, you're not thriving. You're just barely getting by.
That's
And
right.
that just ain't your fault. I can't say it enough. It's just so interesting that, and I had predicted this. I don't think it was on your podcast, but I predicted this to somebody that I spoke to within the past 2 years that there would come a time where you would see like what's happening in Canada, where you can't preach the word of God in public. It actually doesn't threaten anyone. It's happening across America too, where people are getting really enraged by the people that just set up and they're talking about the Bible and stuff like that. It actually doesn't hurt anybody, but it shows you where spirits that are afraid of that language or whatever truth lives in that language, where they activate and come alive because they're empowered by darkness, they're empowered by confusion, they're empowered by accusing and attacking others, and they're empowered by fear and lower emotions. And they can't handle the opposite of that for whatever reason. And you see what happens in Canada right now is that, you can get fined. And I predicted that just as they did in the times of slavery, when they took away all biblical religious literature from people, it was to stop them from having any realizations about themselves as a fragment of consciousness. They're soon going to start taking away all the Gnostic stuff. They're soon going to start taking away everything else, including the New Age, because they don't want anybody to be talking to God. Don't be doing that. Don't be talking to the thing that created everything, because then you're going to get wise on your own and you're going to realize you don't have to participate, right? And so people really need to, whatever it is you believe in, I don't care if you believe in Googa Mooga, stay with it because it's better than believing in stuff that's not working, that's making everybody fat, sick, dumb, and scared, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
100% agree.
If you enjoyed this episode of Between the Lines on Design Within You, you're going to want to tune into the conversation that initially inspired it on our sister channel, Raising the Consciousness of Humanity. And if you're interested in grabbing your design snapshot, link provided in the description of this video, and grab yours now for an in-depth analysis of your unique human energy signature. Thanks for watching.